Yeah, my name is Koti. I joined with the instructor's login credentials. Let's get started, guys. So my name is Koti. Welcome to today's demo on SRE course. I have about 12 plus years of experience in infrastructure engineering, cloud automations. I'm currently working as a senior site reliability engineer with a security based organization. So I have experience working with multi-cloud infrastructure, managing DevOps, cloud operations, infra automations and stuff like that. So I also work on database management. I mean, like once you kind of an SRE role, you will get to deal with multiple streams based on the project that you kind of work on, right? So yeah, so we will be starting with the SRE demo today. In this demo, I will try to give you a walkthrough about, what is SRE and then how it is different from DevOps and then, what all things we will be, you will be, what are the roles and responsibilities of a site reliability engineer, how they are being an asset to an organization, and then how come SRE has been one of the top highly paid in the market right now. All right. So we'll be covering most of it in our demo today. I will also try to give you a small demo on, what kind of work we do when it comes to, setting up the observability for the tools application stack. So I'm going to give you a little walkthrough around that as well today. Anyone with absolute zero idea about cloud, Kubernetes, or DevOps things here? Guys, I just wanted to understand the target crowd. So what's your
Yeah,
experience? You guys can unmute and tell me, like, your current experiences.
yeah, I haven't worked on this, but I have been learning about cloud and DevOps things.
Okay.
So I just want to move to SRE role like that. So I'm taking the DevOps here only in this visual path. They suggested that DevOps required before SRE. Is that correct?
DevOps is kind of a prerequisite for SRE. Yeah. So if you are a DevOps engineer with minimal experience, so you will understand the key differences, because when we talk about site reliability engineering, so we should have a problem statement with DevOps and then its use cases, and then where else the support span can extend it in terms of SRE, right? So yeah, SRE and DevOps, they kind of work together, but SRE has, like, covers a bit more. That is something I'll be covering in the demo. All right. So I consider guys are kind of fairly new to the whole DevOps and SRE thing. So I might go ahead and give you a brief about what is DevOps and then, where SRE comes into the whole SDLC system, right? So software development lifecycle is a process of, like, how we are building the software. Like every organization out there, right, they follow certain approach to build the softwares. So software development lifecycle has a certain phases, like, where you gather the requirements for the software that you wanted to build, and then you prepare the system like your dev environment and all, and then you start writing the code and all, and then you do a testing the source code. Once it is all good, so you would basically promote it to the do a deployment to the production environment. Once the software has been deployed to the production environment, you will set some sort of monitoring, right? Monitoring to your software. So every time you this is the basic process. The requirement gathering is the first phase, and then setting up the system, and then doing the testing, and then doing the deployment, and then deploying your software, and then set up the monitoring for the observability of your software, right? So in this whole process, DevOps plays very key role, right? Automating the build and deployment process. So here they will come up with some sort of CI/CD pipelines for, building the source code, testing the source code, deploying the artifacts, and then, running the monitoring stack, right? They set up a kind of CI/CD pipeline, the way they build the software and then deploy it into the target infrastructures, and then, run some sort of monitoring stack, right? This is where DevOps comes into place, where they kind of automate some of the phases where the SDLC was included, right? So While DevOps is talking about the CI/CD practices, right? It's kind of a bookish practices that any company, any team follows, and then they work together to run this entire CI/CD pipeline. But the actual work is once you're in the whole development plus operations activity, development activity where you have your developers, right? They build the code, and then you have a QA engineers or test engineers, they test the code, and then you have your DevOps engineers, basically they set up the CI/CD pipeline and then build it and deploy it. But when it comes to operations, right, here you will have a lot of operational things. Like there could be some sort of observability is needed. You need to set up some sort of monitoring to know how your system is monitoring. You need to have a proper logging. You need to have a proper observability stack, right? How you are monitoring the logging and stacking. And then there is something called incident management. There is something called change management when you wanted to deploy new changes and stuff like that, right? So you need to kind of make sure you are meeting the SLOs, service level objectives, SLAs, service level agreements, SLIs, and stuff like that, right? So these are all
And
the things.
you'll be having a problem management also.
The problem management, incident management, and then once the incident has happened, how do you basically troubleshoot that? How do you basically making sure that that issue is not actually happening again? How are you creating that RCA, the root cause analysis and stuff like that, right? So these are all the works that a SRE engineers would do it. So what SRE engineer would add is the observability for your application. For the build and deployment, you have a DevOps engineer that would basically create the CI/CD pipelines and builds it. But once the software is actually running into the production, that is where your actual work starts, where you need a lot of operational things to be handled. But there is no, for a company, like think of SRE as an engineer, software engineer who kind of automates a lot of operations. So here you will write an automation stack for setting up the monitoring, setting up the logging stack, and then incident management, your problem management, change management, in managing your SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, and then setting up the DR environments like disaster recovery. And then also he would do a bit of budgeting thing, right? Whether your infrastructure is properly utilized or underutilized or overutilized and all, right? And then some sort of performance test, performance runs, etc. Right. So as a site reliability engineer, you would basically handle all of it. So So what basically a site reliability engineer does, it's applying software engineering to the operations for scalable. The operations that I just mentioned, right? Managing the observability, like monitoring, logging stack, and then incident management and stuff like that. So all those operations, you have a observability engineer or a site reliability engineer who kind of add software engineering practices to it, to making sure your software system is always reliable, accessible, secure. Right. So it was basically introduced in 2003 by this Ben Trainer, and that he was working with Google as a CTO during that time. So he actually introduced this whole SRE practice. From then, every other organization started adopting this SRE mindset, SRE practices into their system. So SRE and DevOps, they kind of not really work side by side. If you are an SRE guy, you should be handling all the DevOps thing. But if you are a DevOps guy, you cannot handle all the SRE things, right? So DevOps just has a limitation until you create CI/CD pipeline and stuff, but SRE covers the observability parting, automating the entire observability once the software has been deployed. So as an SRE, you can do the DevOps practices, but as a DevOps engineer, you cannot do the SRE part. So think of DevOps is like, building a car, right? But then think of SRE, where to break, how to break your entire car system, which is more important. Building a software is not that difficult, right? You have a developer, you can build the code and deploy it. But then running that software, right, that is more critical part. That is where SRE comes into place, right? It's like, you build a car, but then you actually need to know how to brake, where to brake, and when to brake, right? So the braking system of your car is called SRE. Am I making sense? Any questions so far? Am I going fast, or guys?
Fine.
Everyone following me, right? Okay, so what basically DevOps talks? DevOps talks about the faster delivery, collaboration, and automation. Because if you are a DevOps engineer, you have a developer. So what you basically create? You create a dev environment. So how does it basically works when you are a DevOps engineer? The starting point for you is your GitHub source code. GitHub for source code management. Then you will kind of integrate with a CI and CD tooling. Say, for example, you are using Jenkins. So you will create a Jenkins pipeline. So what does that pipeline do? It pulls the code from GitHub, and then you will add the build mechanism within your Jenkins pipeline. So integrates, pulls the code from GitHub, and then it would invoke a build pipeline where builds the code. Once the code has been built, run the test the code artifacts, and then code quality check. Maybe code quality checks, and then you deploy the code. So you deploy it into dev environment first and run all the dev set test suites. Once it is all fine, you will promote it to the stage environment or the pre-production environment, and then you will promote it to the production environment. That's it. That's what a DevOps engineer does, right? So you kind of add a faster delivery by creating a CI/CD pipeline, and then a seamless build and release management process, and then collaboration and automation, right? You create a basic pipeline. But SRE, practical implementations with the focus on reliability. Now imagine you build an app, right? My web app. This is the application you built using CI/CD practice. Here you are a DevOps guy. You build this whole stack. So it's running on the production environment. Now imagine yours is a kind of a online store, my online store, where people can access your website, try to place order for the items they wanted to purchase, something like Amazon or Flipkart or whatever e-commerce website. Now imagine your website is running up, right? So, and then your website, the application was deployed on a hardware configuration, say for example, an M6A 2x large node, right? This node comes with 4 CPU or 8 CPU and some 16 GB of RAM, right? This is the your production mission on which your application is running, right? So your application is running and everything is fine. So on a day-to-day business, right, this application can actually handle up to 10,000 user requests. So meaning 10,000 users can access your myonlinestore.com website, and then they can access the website and then process with their ordering and stuff like that, right? And then your hardware of 8 CPU and 16 GB of RAM is quite sufficient for handling all these 10,000 requests. So what if there is a big billion day sale comes, some Pongal offers came in, and then you have announced some sort of discounts on your on the products, right? So on a regular traffic of 10,000 has become doubled, like 20K users. So on the day of Big Billion Day sale, on a regular 10,000 users have actually been doubled because you have some offers. They try to hit your website, but your underlying infrastructure of 8 CPU and right, this is not kind of sufficient. It gets to the bottleneck, and then it got exhausted, and then your website went down. Right. This is the real-time problem statement for any websites. You need to have high availability. What is the solution here? To have an high availability, you need to set up some sort of auto scaling, automatically scale up or scale down the configs and all, right? This and DevOps engineer cannot handle it because this is not his part of role, right? He sets up a CI/CD pipeline, making sure your website is up and ready on any any kind of hardware. But how do you measure that? How do you add reliability to your application? How do you add the availability? How do you add the security and stuff like that? So this is where an SRE comes into place. So here you would perform a performance benchmarking. You will understand that, okay, if I set up some XYZ node, what is the maximum request it could handle? When there is a higher throughput into the system, how do I actually scale it up? How do I know how many requests my system is handling? Now here you have so many questions. How do I know how many incoming requests, right? My system is handling, right? So you need, right? You also need to know, how do I know if my application is all okay, like logging? How do I monitor the health state of my application, right? You need a monitoring solution. You need to set up some sort of Prometheus monitoring, Grafana, and then, Graylog or whatever, right? You need to have a proper logging for managing the availability, scalability, reliability, and stuff like that. So that is where SRE practices comes into place. So where you would be handling all of it. So yeah, so when DevOps talks about how fast you can build a system without any errors and all, your SRE practices implements focus on the reliability of your whole application stack. That is the very high level difference, right? So what is the core responsibilities of SRE? Like I mentioned, ensure the availability, reliability, setting up monitoring, alerts, instant responses, postmortems. Like there is an incident happened, right? So some of the production outage happened on a particular infrastructure, particular environment. So being an SRE, you would jump into it. You will try to dig down into the actual root cause of the issue. What actions triggered that issue? What we could have done in order to avoid that, right? You do that complete analysis on that particular issue. You call it as an RCA, root cause analysis, and then you will prepare that RCA docs, and then you kind of share it with your internal teams and external teams. If you are a customer facing project, you will be sharing the RCS with the customer, saying that, okay, this is the outage and stuff like that. You will manage the entire uptime of your application. So you call it as uptime of applications, right? So DevOps just build the application, but you make sure that you manage the entire uptime of your applications, right? So and then capacity planning, like I mentioned, what is the when you are bringing up a new infrastructure, you need to do the capacity planning. What kind of instances we wanted to do? What is the incoming load? What is the expected the requirement for the application, right? How much RAM we need to set up? How much memory we need to set up? What kind of infrastructure we need to build up, right? The whole thing you would be planning that, and then you would manage the change management. Those are all the kind of responsibilities of an SRE on a very high level, right? So supporting software development lifecycle and automation, you collaborate with the dev teams and operation teams and automating, like automate some of the manual tasks with the automations, and then you build the tools for CI/CD dashboard and scripts and stuff like that, right? So you talk about SLOs, service level objectives, service level indicators, and service level agreements, and then error budget. So it basically, it's the time, right? How much time you are defining for an SLA. So what basically SLA means, you are running a system inside of your customer system in your organization, and then you need to provide an SLA. There is something wrong with the application, right? You need to provide an SLA. How quick we will respond back, and then how quick we action it on that particular item and all. That's the SLA. So in order to reach this SLA, what are the measures you are taking? That, right? SLOs. SLIs is the metrics that you consider to reach these SLOs and stuff like that. So we will be talking about all of this in detail, trying to go through that project thing, do a demo project with SLAs, SLIs, and SLO planning and stuff like that. And then chaos engineering is done. Something actually done, something went wrong with the production environment. So you need to do the RCA and making sure you are taking the appropriate actions not to repeat that items, that action, that failures and stuff like that. So I'll walk you through some of the RCA, real-time RCA examples, how they actually build, how do they basically track the incident, what is the incident description, what is the incident timeline, what is the corrective actions we take, what are the mitigation we followed, what is the root cause for the issue, and the future action items on how to make sure that kind of issues are not repetitive and again, right? So we'll make sure that we'll follow that RCA things and all. And resiliency testing, we do some sort of performance benchmarking and some sort of synthetic testing where to measure the performance of our application and stack like that, right? So SRE team structure and roles. So it's we will be working very close with developers. So as an SRE, you also do some sort of coding and automation, incident handling, maintenance automation. You work closely with the developers, system admins, network admins, QA engineers to make sure we provide a very resilient system to them, right? Our day-to-day focus, like I mentioned, it's uptime of the application, making sure the latency issues are mitigated. Our system is actually reliable, right? And then change rollout and performance. So you would focus on all these areas. So we will be explaining about what kind of tools we will be using to manage uptimes, latency changes, and change rollouts and stuff like that, right? We will be talking about it. So we'll also look at some of real world experience examples with the GitLab SRE workflow, how the on-call works, how the Terraform and Kubernetes, Ansible, they all tools come together to set up this entire SRE practices, right? Same with the Dynatrace. So these are the very known use cases. So we can talk about those two use cases in our classes, right? So plan for failure, not just for success. Promote learning culture and automation first approach, cross team collaboration. That is the kind of culture an SRE engineer brings into the organization, right? And then summary, what makes SRE unique? Let's just go back to this. I would like to give you a few more things. So these are the SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs. SLA is basically the amount of time that we committed for our customers, right? Yeah, on an event of any production issue. What is the SLA? How fast we basically define. Then SLA can be like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and something like that, right? So SLO is in order to reach that 10 minutes of SLA, right? What are the target values or goals we set as an SRE team for that SLO, and how are we measuring this SLO, right? That talks about SLA. So basically those three are. So meantime restore is like, you have an incident happen, and how fast, what is the average time that you are actually recovering the system back, right? That's what the meantime restoration. So to kind of replicate this, we will learn about a database setup, and then we will see how do we perform the backup and recovery. We will create a false failure with the system, and we will see how we use the SLA practices, right? SRE practices to recover the system. So that is something we will be learning in part of our training, right? So what are the principles of site reliability engineering? So you embrace the risk. So accept that there is a risk, there is an outage, and then make sure you work on it, mitigate in a way that that same kind of incident is never happen again in the system, right? Your user service level objectives like SLAs, SLIs, SLOs, eliminate toil, monitor the distributed systems, automate it, release engineering, and strive for simplicity. Like, keeping the things simple, that is the best practice to keep SRE practice more successful in an organization. And then this something we have already discussed, the basic differences between DevOps and SRE. So DevOps is just talks about how fast you build the software, while your SRE talks about, what kind of resiliency, reliability, stability, security you add to your entire system. I'll just pause here for one more minute. I'm open for any questions, guys.
So how many days is the course?
The course is about 30 days. So, and then, yeah, maybe I'll just explain that in a moment. Let me go through the demo first. So it kind of gives you an idea on what an SRE engineer does, right? So imagine like I'm an SRE, and then I got a requirement tomorrow. So say that I need to build an application, build a web app that has a home page, and that has a metric space, and then I need to set, this is the requirement, right? A simple hello world front end website I need to build. This is the requirement I have gotten. And then if I'm a DevOps engineer, what I would basically do, I would just engage with the developers, right? I choose an environment where I wanted to set up the CI/CD thing. So I go and get the dev environment prepared, and then I would ask the developer to start building the source code for this software requirement. Once he has built it, right, I ask him to push it to a GitHub repository. The GitHub repository is where my source code is there, and then maybe I'll create a Jenkins. I create a CI/CD pipeline where it takes the source code from
GitHub.
GitHub, and then I will invoke the build tools, and then it builds the tool, and then it generates the artifacts, and then I write a deployment thing. Maybe I'll use some sort of Ansible tooling or Ansible tool within my Jenkins to deploy that artifact into a target mission. So imagine there is an EC2 mission. In the EC2 mission, I will deploy the software. Once I deploy the software, and then it has a DNS attachment with Route 53 and stuff like that. So anybody go to internet, they just hit the www.mywebsite.com. It hits to that Route 53. From there, it comes back to the EC2 instance, and your application is serving it there. This is the simple thing that a DevOps engineer does. So that's the limitations he has, right? So now the same request comes to me as a DevOps engineer. Sorry, as an SRE engineer, right? So the same requirement came to me, right, as to build a web app application, and then I would be proposing three solutions. So first I say, okay, where do you want me to deploy? Where to deploy? Infrastructure, right? So we have options like bringing it as an EC2 mission, or going into a EKS or ECS or VMware, where we wanted to deploy and all, right? We will think about this direction. So now let's decide that we wanted to do it with Docker, right? Let's build a Docker image, and then we will deploy it into the EKS. That is the thing. After this, I will think about, okay, once I deploy the application, how am I securing it, right? How many replicas of the application replicas I'm managing, how am I monitoring it, and then how I manage the logging, how do I manage the logging stack, so on and so forth. We will think about all these directions if you are an SRE. So now let's go to the code base. So this is a simple Python application. If you see, it creates two files, like welcome to SRE demo is the home page, and then it has like two paths. Metrics is one path, where because this application I wanted to know when someone hits this application, what is the, so I'll talk about how many requests does this app handles, right? So I kind of consider about the whole observability of the application, right? So now what I come up with a solution of microservices. I use Docker, I use EKS, and then I have the source code ready. I have the Docker file generated, and then I create a stack within my EKS for my application, where I define where is the application, the Docker image I have, and then I define what is the deployment, how many replicas I wanted to create, how the application is accessible on what port and stuff like that. I create a service for it, and so on and so forth. All right, now let's just go ahead and try to deploy that. Let's see how it works. Okay. Uh, right. So now I'm here. So I set up a minikube. So minikube is like a small Kubernetes cluster on my local. For my demo, I'm using it. So I'm going to install this. Okay, get ns, create ns SRE. So this part DevOps engineer doesn't do it, because you would only do if there is an EKS cluster, you would run a CI/CD pipeline to deploy it. But whereas you as a SRE, you will build up an Minikube or EKS cluster, set up that whole infrastructure stack, and then build up the deployment stack for the Helm charts and stuff like that, and then you will build it. So I mean, on a high level, it looks very thing, but just imagine that what as an SRE, the thought process of the SRE engineers in the same case, right? So I just installed that application. So if I go to my lens, if I go to that particular namespace, SRE namespace, I should be having my application running, application pod running. You see, application pod is running here. So if I just connect to this application, you see, welcome to SRE demo app. My website is up. And then if I say /work, it will tell me, hello, SRE demo took 0.27 seconds. This is more important. When someone try to hit the website, so I know how fast my application is responding. It takes 27 seconds to respond back, right? And then there is something called metrics. I set up the whole metric stack. Now I need to set up a monitoring to it. So how do I do it? I just set up some sort of monitoring tool like Prometheus. Okay. Right. Let me just do a force quit. So in the same place, I have a Prometheus stack. I have a Grafana. Prometheus for managing the monitoring the application, and Grafana is to get the metrics GUI version, visualization of the dashboard and stuff like that. So if I go to the Prometheus, if I say Helm install from, right, I should be having my Prometheus stack running. Now you see there is a Prometheus pod. So if I just connect to that pod, so it basically you can create an alert, and then you can define that, okay, this application is running now. If this application is not accessible, it will create an alert for you, right? And stuff like that. And then if you go to the Grafana, so Helm install. So now I'm installing Grafana stack. So if I just go up here, I have a Grafana pod just come up, right? So if I do a port forwarding of it, so I should be seeing admin, I guess. Let's just skip this. You see, here you can create some nice dashboards about your application, how it is behaving. So you have an application, you have a monitoring, you have metrics collection and creating dashboard. So you will know how many requests your application is handling, whether your application is exhausted with incoming requests, whether the hardware that running on the system is sufficient or not, right? You see, this is your application pod. It runs with, if you look at here, it is actually taking up to 1 CPU, right? How do you know if you need to increase that CPU and all, right? You just go to the deployment of it, go to your app, look at the what is the current utilization of the application, and then how you can bump it up to an extra CPU and stuff like that. So you will manage all of it. You will manage the entire observability of your application. So this is how you will do as an SRE engineer. So you will manage stuff in Kubernetes clusters or GKE clusters, or Azure Kubernetes clusters, and you will basically manage it. This is a very short demo about what you will be managing, how you will be managing. So this is something you will be learning. You will be learning about each of these tools. You will be learning about Grafana. You will be learning about Prometheus. You will be learning about your application stack. You will be learning about creating app stacks, something like this. You will be learning about Docker, and then building your own Docker files and stuff like that. So imagine tomorrow I got a requirement, right? And then I got a requirement to build a web application, right? This is how you will end up as a DevOps engineer, as an SRE engineer. So I'll explain what is infra, what is on-prem, right? What is VMware, what is cloud, data center one, right? And then what is containerization. Docker and all, right? Docker, K8s and stuff like that. So we'll be talking about these areas. So this is the primary one. And then we will talk about a simple CI/CD practice. So what we will do is we'll create a simple CI/CD pipeline for building a web application with the database as backend. And then we will add the observability for it. So here we will be talking about Prometheus. We'll be talking about Grafana. We'll be talking about Elasticsearch.
Okay.
Right. So these are all SRE
Yeah.
tool stack. And then here we will be talking about RCAs, incident management, problem management, change management, all these practices, right? So we'll be talking about all of it in here. So I could give a high level overview about infra. I could give a high level overview about CI/CD, the DevOps thing, but I'll be focusing more on SRE part, that observability part. Right, you see here, we'll be talking about setting up a high level application in the AWS. We'll talk about Terraform, Ansible, Helm chart, deploying infrastructure with Terraform. Let's take the same example. Here I will be writing a Terraform module. I'll show you how we can deploy the infrastructure first. You need to bring up the infrastructure first and then deploy the application stack and set up the monitoring and observability to it, right? We'll cover all those aspects in the training part. Yeah.
Sorry, as part of this observability toolset, right? So are we not planning to cover any tracing tools like OpenTelemetry or?
Prometheus as an alternative, you can go with Hotel Matrix or Corologics.
Okay.
So if you are good at Prometheus, I mean, you can manage the OpenTelemetry as well.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, I think Kubernetes is something that I will be focusing, because SRE without Kubernetes like makes no sense, right? Most of the organizations, they are with Kubernetes in as their platform. So if you need to know the platform first. So we'll talk about infrastructure, we'll talk about platform, and then we'll talk about the some of the SRE tool set.
Terraform, you're not going to do it, right?
I will be covering Terraform, but very on a very high level. Like if you look at here, right, it just says like one day I have to cover Ansible, Terraform, help deploy, right? If Terraform alone will take you like 30 days if I have to explain end to end. So I can give you a very high level thing, maybe show you how to work with it and all. You will have to invest some time trying to practice it and then come up with more use cases of the tool. I wouldn't be able to cover like, all aspects of any tool, but I can give you a high level interaction, high level integration with each tool, and that should give you a right starting point to explore by yourself. That is something I can definitely plan. But Kubernetes and Docker, I can give you some really decent understanding about, in the Docker how to build the image, because this is the heart of your entire practice. If you are not good at platform, right? No matter you are learning DevOps, you are learning SRE, it doesn't make any difference. This platform is the heart. If you are as good as you are with the platform, any practice you can learn. So for me, the hard prerequisite for you guys to start off with would be Docker, Kubernetes, and AWS.
Okay.
Right. So we'll be also talking about some incident management frameworks like, PagerDuty, Opsgenie, how they work. And then, we'll talk about the incident management and then running in RCA docs, how the RCA looks like and stuff like that. Right. So yeah, and then we'll talk about some of the process, but SRE is like more of process oriented, and then like of process oriented, of technical basically. Right. In terms of tooling, I think I would be covering all these tools for you: Terraform, Prometheus, Elasticsearch, and then Opsgenie. Yeah, I think this is pretty much. Yeah, this is the stack that I would be covering, like maybe end to end.